Hello and welcome to the Bytes podcast. We're here today to talk about FinOps, the it word, what's going to happen with FinOps, what has happened to FinOps, what we're going to do with FinOps, and what potentially you could be doing with FinOps. I'm joined by a couple of esteemed colleagues, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi there, Chris Colledge, Head of Technical Account Management at Bytes.
Hi there, Ben Mora. I'm Head of FinOps Strategic Advisory at IBM Consulting for the UK.
They've both got better titles than I am. I'm Nick. I'm Head of Consulting Pre-Sales here at Bytes. So I think the first thing to do is to establish our credentials, right? So what do we know about FinOps? So over to you first of all. How did you get into FinOps?
I got shouted at by a customer. So there's a story. So how did I get into FinOps? So I was doing data center engineering at Oracle. I left Oracle to go and be a consultant doing DevOps leadership, right? And my team was building some awesome things in cloud until a customer saw how much they were spending and got very upset with me. And my response was, well, we're building what you're asking for. And then it became a conversation about, well, okay, are we building what we should be building? Are we actually using the resources in an intelligent and responsible way? That was, 2018, early 2019? Around about the same time the foundation started, FinOps as a term became a thing. And the community and then the discipline started growing from there. So that's kind of let's come from there.
What about you, Chris?
So probably a little bit later into FinOps, because I've got, over the last 8 years, I've worked largely in consulting and managed services spaces. And what I was finding is I was being looped into calls to help FinOps people do technical things to make their bills cheaper. So they'd be looking at architectural optimization to drive costs down. They'd be looking at setting up usage optimization, auto scaling and switching things on and off and stuff like that. And me as the technical resource on that was responsible for going and impacting and making those changes for our customers. That was maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And since then, obviously, the world of FinOps has taken off because cloud bills haven't necessarily slowed down like people would want them to. And been part of Bytes' FinOps service, in both positioning it and working through it with our customers for a while now, yeah.
Cool. I suppose from my perspective, I'm really SAM-focused, ITAM-focused. And from a managed service perspective, it's always quite difficult to quantify the return on investment and how quickly that's going to happen. So we're always on the lookout for new ways that we can engage a customer and deliver some value early on in a managed service. So when FinOps came along as a concept, we were already looking at optimizing cloud. We're aware of cloud shock because it was all spoken about way back. But it was very much a point in time. How can we fix what you're currently doing wrong? How can I make that better for you? But yeah, the conversations were about how can I get in there and deliver some quick savings using FinOps, because it's all very much data driven at the early stages, at least. I'd say that's changed an awful lot now. We're now talking about how we're talking about the entire circle, the entire service loop of FinOps and how we can assist the customer with the whole vision of what FinOps can deliver. And ITAM is also moving towards being structured in exactly the same way. So people are saying, well, actually, FinOps is a great foundation. It's a great structure in which to work. So why don't we use that same terminology and the same approach to handle on-premises, to handle your standard, tin box virtualization and all that sort of stuff. So for me, it's all about making sure that the client doesn't think that it's a single one-off hit.
Do you think part of the reason that FinOps has gained so much traction is because what you just mentioned, bill shock? People weren't expecting to pay that much for cloud, whereas the rest of the world of software and hardware and data centers, people kind of know it was expensive. But back maybe 5-6 years ago, everyone was sort of being told that the cloud is definitely going to be cheaper. They were being told that, CFOs were signing things off because you say, look, it's all OPEX and it's not going to be as much, and here's the business case. And then they had that bill shock. Was it the shock factor that sort of drove FinOps and made FinOps such a...
Would you say?
Exponential growth, I suppose.
So I use analogies a lot when I talk about this. I'll try very hard not to use too many. But fundamentally, I think the reason for this unexpected spending growth is a number of different reasons, one of which is the pace at which you can adopt and grow, right? I worked for an international media company who built a streaming platform covering the United States from basically nothing, no deployed infrastructure at all, to the capacity to serve 10 million concurrent users. And they did that in 8 months, right? I've worked in data centers, tried doing that in a data center in 8 months. It's impossible. So the rate at which you can scale is phenomenal. You can have a great idea over coffee at breakfast time, and by lunchtime you can POV it to your boss and say, look, built this, right? There's the things we can do with cloud now in terms of scalability, in terms of time to market, we've never been able to do before with technology. That's almost an addictive thing for businesses to start getting into and expecting and getting used to that, right? That quick time to market.
We're just addicted to the speed.
Yeah, well, I call it this instant gratification, right? The Amazon app thing, right? I want a thing, I'll press a button, it'll arrive tomorrow morning, you know what I mean? That kind of vibe. So that's very, very appealing to many businesses in terms of time to market and all that kind of stuff. The other piece, which kind of goes hand in hand with that, is the rise of DevOps and Agile, which are fueled by that instant availability of technology, right? We're able to do sort of 2-week sprints to build real value using cloud services that maybe we've never played with before. And at the end of a 2-week sprint, we can deliver an item of value, right? Because we've got that immediate availability. However, with that instant availability, I mean, to kind of quote Spider-Man, which I like doing, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And unfortunately, we've got a lot of power now in the hands of engineers building services, building solutions, but they don't have visibility of the impact of these decisions that they're making, and they don't see the cost, they don't see the associated value derived from it, or lack thereof, right? So there's a disconnect between the demand from the business to build everything yesterday, the accountability of the spending in the hands of people who are traditionally not used to doing that and being responsible for spending, and that disconnect results in this huge explosion of use.
I agree. I think that CloudShock came from a couple of sources, really. So I think there was almost a cult when cloud first came along. There was this cult, and it seemed that there was an awful lot of heads of function that were changing their entire foresight for their business, for their forecasts, and saying, we are cloud first. We are going to put everything in the cloud, and all the stuff we've currently got, we're going to just lift and put in the cloud as well, because cloud's where to go. And it was a cult. I don't know that there was an awful lot of, it was, we need to be on the same train as everybody else. So that, I think, created a backlog of problems, both in terms of governance and in terms of the architecture of what was moved, and some of the decisions as to, again, what was created in the cloud that actually would have been better elsewhere, perhaps. The second thing is the ease of use. So that's governance.
Yeah.
Actually, what it's done is it's allowed fast development, it's allowed agile work, it's allowed the ability to deliver quickly. You know, I might reference ASOS, for example. I know that they release 5 or 6 versions of their app per day. Yeah. And they're able to do that because it's all cloud-based, all container-based. They can quickly change parts of their app and release it and test it on such a swift cycle. And similarly, they can also almost test in front of their customers, because if it doesn't go right, they can flip the old one back in again. You won't even notice it's happened. Brilliant. But who's making sure that the nth version of that app that is no longer needed anymore has been turned off?
Exactly.
Nobody, or I'd say historically very few. I think that's changing. FinOps has made that change.
Yeah.
So my next question to you guys is, FinOps is just saving money, right? It's just how to buy something cheaper. What's the main misconception about FinOps?
I always use the analogy that if I started driving to work, let's say I do the same journey to work every single day in a petrol car, and my fuel bill is £50 a month, right? Let's say that starts going up to £65, £70 a month, right? Let's just imagine that I've made no changes whatsoever, and it's gone up to £65, £70 a month because there's probably something inefficient with my car, right? It's running rich, burning more fuel than it needs to burn to do the same journey and my car starts running rich. If you think that by just buying stuff cheaper is saving you money and fixing problems, it's the biggest mistake you can make, right? Because that is the equivalent of me saying my fuel bill's gone up, and instead of having a look under the bonnet and seeing why my car's running inefficiently, I'm just going to buy an oil tanker's worth of petrol. Great, I'll fix my problem. Petrol gets cheap again. I commit to it. I've got to use it. I'm not going to change my car for an electric one or anything like that. I'm not going to make my life any better. I'm just going to buy petrol cheaper to do the same journey. And I think businesses make this massive mistake of going headfirst into what appears like low-hanging fruit of rate optimization and saying, cloud bill's really expensive. What's the best sticking plaster? We'll just buy cloud cheaper. Sign up to a massive commitment with some of the hyperscalers. Sign up to loads of RIs. The problem is, as soon as you do that, it punishes any sort of change that you could have made, right? If you sign up to these massive commitments as part of your agreements or reservations or commitment discounts, what's the point in changing it? Why would you make it better? Because you've paid for it for 3 years. And I know you can convert things. I know you can move it around. I know there's certain levels of flexibility within it. But if you just sign a massive agreement saying we're going to give you X million pounds over 3 years, what incentives do you then have to halve your cloud bill? Because you're committing to that usage.
Yeah, and you picked up on one half. The rate optimization piece is one thing, right? But you've also got the usage optimization, and these two things, if you think about them, depending on your propensity to do one or the other, there's a blend that needs to be struck, right? So if you've got a lot of capacity to re-architect your recently lifted and shifted out of the data center environment that maybe you've done, if you've got the capacity to go and re-engineer that right now and do your rate optimization right now, so usage optimization right now, and fix that, great, right? Put your plan in place for your 6-month period of what you're going to be doing for that engineering work, maybe that at the cost of any other production work you're doing, and don't commit to all of it, right? But if you know that actually, because you've got a tight delivery schedule and you can't do that engineering work right now, but you want to later, then maybe buying a shorter term commitment to bridge that gap is a wise idea. But there's a balancing act to be made, right? And the analogy that I use, and I use too many, I need to stop, is the tide on the beach, right? If you imagine low tide, the water's at the low tide, right? It's probably not going to go below that level. You're probably going to be able to commit to that level of spending safer, if you're pretty positive that your variable compute, your sort of optimized compute won't go below that point. That's a safe commit. Then you've got this tidal region where it will vary, and it will vary based upon a lot of factors. What do your customers want from you, and how much demand are they placing on your service? What does your build pipeline look like? What does your product release schedule look like? How much efficiency work are you going to be doing over the next little while? All this stuff will dictate what happens with that tidal region, and you can start looking at where the break-even point is for how much efficiency work you're going to do and how much commitment you're going to put to. But doing it blind, like Chris said, around like just the financial mechanism of the hyperscaler says you should commit to all of this 95% of your spend and get a discount and away you go, is a terrible idea.
I agree. I think I suppose the biggest misconception for me is the fact that businesses get involved at the first stage of FinOps. They may well either get a managed service provider, or they'll get someone to assist them. They maybe get the right tooling, or they develop tooling. They're doing the right first stage bits.
Yeah.
They make some initial savings. What they then don't do is to close the loop, right? And that's the biggest misconception, and it's the biggest loss of value in terms of FinOps. So, you've got all that tooling in place. So you should be able to see anomalies. You should be able to see stuff that's occurring that's out of the norm and fix them before you receive the bill.
Yeah.
Because you've put the tooling in place. So use the tooling. You should be able to forecast what your bill is for that month based on various different criteria. And you could also proactively get in and fix it before it turns into pound notes, US dollars as the case may be, right? You could be fixing your process. You could be looking after your governance. You could be automating processes, right? All of this happens, but I would say the biggest misconception is the fact that you do that first step and then moan about the fact that that function is no longer delivering the value that it needs to.
I think that's the importance of setting up a function though, right? Because most teams where I've worked, the person who is they say, oh, we're setting up a FinOps function, but really what they're doing is they're just taking an engineer or a dev away from the day job to have a sort of soft focus on FinOps a little bit and be, oh, I'm the FinOps lead, but I'm still trying to develop apps and I'm still trying to deliver stuff for the company. And so what they see is us try and save this much money as a task to do. And once they have done that task, it is back to development and back to, delivering apps and that kind of stuff. And it's really hard to free up time in a business, even though we proved it out. We got the ROI. We can show ROI on FinOps and all of that kind of stuff. But you need to take people, and here's the important thing: you need to take people away who are technical people, right, to go and make some of these technical changes. So you're going to need that dev and you're going to need that engineer. And the business needs to make a decision. Do I want that person delivering apps or do I want them delivering FinOps? Because I think it's really hard to get them to deliver both at the same time.
Yeah, they almost contradict each other, don't they? Right? Because on the one side, it's focus on build. On the other side, it's focus on tidy up. And ideally, what you'd like is for everybody to be great citizens and for everyone to be FinOps aware, for them to be value aware, so that they make the judgment themselves when they're building and deploying and working with their services. We already have engineers caring about security, resiliency, capacity, elasticity, scalability. These are all metrics that are fundamental to a DevOps engineer's life, right? Why isn't cost on that list? Why isn't value on that list? Why don't they see the bigger picture, right? Yeah. If we educate and involve our people as they build, frankly, the machine that drives the revenue, how they can do that better and deliver more value for the business, then everybody wins.
Well, I think because there's a disconnect between the big business dollars and the developers sort of world that they see, right? Yeah. The incentivization around FinOps isn't the same as incentivization around security or anything like that, and there hasn't been that much of a focus on it. I think it should change. I agree with you wholeheartedly. But one thing that I heard the other day that really resonated with me is someone who was working in the engineering department, and they had goals specifically tied to revenue of their software development. And they just said, look, a dollar saved is a dollar earned, right? If you're building software to sell, so it was a small software house, and then they were building software to sell, and it was sort of like an owner, so he had skin in the game. Yep. And he was saying to me, a dollar saved is a dollar earned, right? Every pound or dollar that I save on app development is one that I would have had to go out and sell for in the market.
So this is an argument for either slightly amended success metrics, like how do we measure success? So, total cost of development, total cost of operation.
Yeah.
We know how much it cost us to develop that piece of software. Now it's in prod. Actually, what's it costing us to keep operating that piece of software? Mm-hmm. Do we continue to measure that once it's in prod or once it's in prod? Doesn't really matter. It's now delivering to the business, and we'll measure the value that the software delivers to the business, not the cost that it's creating by us having to maintain it and develop it and update it. So let's assume that our audience have all been onto the FinOps website. They've all informed themselves fully about exactly what FinOps is, which is great. But what the FinOps website doesn't do is tell you about what's new, right? So in terms of recent changes or recent developments and what you see on the horizon, what do you think has changed and will be changing in the FinOps world in the near future?
I think there is a fair bit of information out there, not just on the Foundation website, but on lots of other sources as well, about new ideas coming through. Things like Gen AI and AI involvement in FinOps. And in fact, both directions, right? How do you manage the cost of Gen AI? And how could you use Gen AI to augment and support FinOps? Right, so in both ways, they're interesting sort of co-position things. That's one thing that I'm really interested in right now, is to look at that. Another one is around understanding the right metrics at the right time. So one of the things about metrics is that we like to hold on to them. We like to figure out what the metric should be for this thing that we're doing, and then that's our metric, and that's our metric from now until the end of time, right? Mm-hmm. And cloud doesn't work like that, and nor really does any of this other stuff that we're doing. So nor does FinOps, right? So at the early days, when you've just left the data center, you've migrated to cloud, you've got a whole load of stuff that looks just like a data center. you've got static VMs, you've got subnets, you've got gateways, all the stuff that you would expect to find in the data center architecture is in your cloud, right? Arguably the worst way to use cloud, right? In most use cases. So you would start to re-engineer that. And as you get towards the point whereby you're using cloud native services like serverless and AWS Lambda, that kind of thing, chances are the metrics that were important to you at that earlier stage with that sort of static architecture are going to make no sense in the newer world. So understanding how to change as you go through is another interesting piece that's starting to happen. Is like, how do we evolve our maturity, not just of our environment and our processes, but the way we see our world and measure success also. It's like a meta measurement of measuring the measurements, right?
But how many times have you seen it? And I've seen it loads of times. You go into a customer, they did a lift and shift.
Yep.
They started to modernize.
Yep.
They haven't fully modernized. And now you've got sort of an environment here, an environment here. They've got sort of the same metric trying to apply for both.
Yeah.
The modernization piece never quite gets completed because there's always the stuff that they have to leave behind and stuff like that. And so you're sort of operating bimodally when it comes to FinOps, and it just causes absolute chaos and confusion because they haven't sat down and gone, what are the right metrics for each different environment? And also they haven't set the business expectation that whilst you're trying to modernize and whilst you're trying new things, you're still going to have the running costs of a big old chunky VM that's powering it, right? And so your cost, it doesn't double, but it goes up quite a bit because, let's say you're moving a load of SQL boxes to SQL PAS, right? Those SQL boxes will still need to live until you're 100% certain you can cut over. So there's going to be months and months and months of having sort of two things set up for the same thing, right? Which is tricky for businesses.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. Where they don't take businesses don't take into account the fact that it isn't just as like a light switch from one to the other.
Wouldn't it be great?
That would be wonderful, right? We trust our architecture so much that we will just, as soon as the new one's ready, we'll just delete the old one. It's fine, that doesn't happen, right? And it just doesn't factor into a lot of strategies. I think as well with that kind of halfway, that staggered approach, that's normal and natural, right? That's going to be the case in all sorts of deployments. That will be what happens. And to expect that and to have an open strategy that allows for things to be experimented with and for things to be explored so that the right solution is found, the right pathway is found for that service, and expect to iterate, expect for there to be failures because this is breaking new ground.
The most exciting thing for me on the horizon, I'll touch on the Gen AI thing really quickly. One thing that I've seen people start doing is building into their LLM stack or their Gen AI stack a model selector based on prompt. So one of the things if you build a application and you're prompting the application, you build it in Azure, you're using something like the Azure OpenAI service, you've got to select which model that application uses. Does it use GPT-4o? Does it use 3.5? Does it use Turbo? I can't remember the exact statistic, but something like GPT 3.5 is fractions of the cost of GPT-4. And for actually just generating like boring text or not being that creative or just generating text for you, it's absolutely fine, right? It's absolutely fine, fraction of the cost. But you want to make sure that you've got GPT-4o built into the application to make sure that the trickier stuff that can handle. So what they've built in is an application orchestration layer by where you put in the prompt, it asks the LLM what model would be best to answer this prompt based on cost, and then it will go and ask that prompt to the LLM that sits on the back of it. And you can make AI apps phenomenally cheaper because people are starting to hit like sort of old bugger moments where they're seeing their bills for the Gen AI apps because they will all want to use the top models. The lower level models aren't doing what they need to do, and they need to be able to select it. So that's one really exciting thing. Another really exciting thing, automation. I'm seeing automation be a game changer when it comes to FinOps. Let's go back to your problem. If you've got the time to re-architect everything and make everything cheaper, then great. You can re-architect everything and make everything cheaper, and your cloud bill is going to drop off quite significantly. Most people don't have time to do that, and they don't have a plan to do that. So what we're seeing lots of tools coming out and going into customers' environments that makes the automation of savings a lot easier, right? So if you're going in and you're saying, I don't have any time available, but I do want to save costs and I don't want to make a big commitment, why wouldn't you automate the part of your job that you would be saving costs from, And there's different ways of doing it. But yeah, that's what I'm seeing being a game changer.
So one of the other use cases for automation that I think is brilliant as well comes down to reducing the cost of achievement for the savings. Let's say, for example, you've got an estate with 5,000 VMs that are all ever so slightly too big, right? And you could save $10 per VM, right? But getting an individual engineer or a team of engineers to go fix that...
Never do it.
No, you'd never do that. It would take forever. 5,000 VMs, right-sizing them slightly? No. But automation will just do that like this. Yeah. And straight away, there's 50 grand a month that you've just taken off, right?
And that engineer doesn't get cheesed off.
And the engineer doesn't get fed up with 5,000 VMs.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think engineers will just get cheesed off about something anyway. I'm not sure that you're going to avoid that circumstance. So for our audience, so where do you go to educate yourself and to inform yourself about what's new or what to do next? Where would you recommend that people go and involve themselves?
There's massive community of people out there. I think the FinOps Foundation membership is now 26,000 members now, right? 16,000 certified practitioners, and a bunch of certified professionals like myself. Yeah, that is an enormous brain share. So the FinOps.org Foundation website. There's also other communities as well. So there's FinOps Connect as well. There's a whole load of different communities out there focused on collaborating, sharing ideas, sharing understanding, and there's a lot of knowledge out there to be had. The other fascinating thing that I use a lot at the moment is the state of FinOps. So that's on data.finops.org. Self-reported over like 1,000 respondees or something. It's been going for a few years now, and it tells you what everybody else has been up to. What are people finding difficult? What are they working on? What are their focuses?
I was going to say the state of FinOps. I think that is such a useful tool, and they make all of the data that they collect into nice, easy to understand graphs. And so if I'm going into a customer to say, look, you're not the only ones with this challenge that we help fix, I can say, 90% of people also struggle with this. That's why we've built solutions to help with it. So that's what I use mainly, and Reddit, but we can't really say that, can we?
We can definitely say Reddit. r/FinOps is a good place to go.
Definitely.
And I think I'd round that off by just saying, engage with your partner. So, from a Bytes perspective, we talk FinOps with hundreds of customers across many, many different industry fields. We've seen challenges to delivery. We've seen how people have approached them and how they've got around or over those barriers. So whilst we may not be able to assist you with a very, very specific technical requirement, we will be able to tell you what we've seen in the market, what people are doing. It's like a more focused forum almost. So there's that resource available to you there. So I think we need to tie this up because I'm sure people will need to go and refresh themselves. So, takeaway points. A couple of takeaway points from our chat today, guys. What would you say are the two things that have struck you about what we've discussed?
2 points for me always, right? One, it's a marathon, not a sprint. This is not a one and done quick thing. This is an ongoing process. And the other one is that it's always changing. You're always learning, you're always improving. And that's because the hyperscaler is always changing, and so is the world.
Agreed.
Biggest takeaway for me is there are bigger savings to be made outside of just buying stuff cheaper.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's about making sure that you get everybody on board. FinOps is not a standalone service. It should be part of a multiple sets of communication pathways. Similarly, report your successes. So you will get the engagement and the money you need from the business in order to be able to employ and use FinOps properly if you're reporting the successes to the right people in the right way. Some people will want the savings. Some people will want to know that actually your application is running 6 seconds faster or has had less downtime. So there are ways to report that, but that fairy dust, what you've achieved from your practice, your function, is absolutely key. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we get another chance to come back and talk again, maybe with some more specifics for our audience. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.